I discovered that my daughter was consuming alcohol when I found a hidden bottle of vodka in her room. Laura had always been deeply concerned about her 16-year-old daughter, Emma. Their relationship had been strained for some time, with frequent arguments and a growing distance between them. Laura tried her best to keep up with Emma's life, but it often felt like she was losing touch. One afternoon, while Emma was at school, Laura decided to clean up Emma's room, hoping that a little tidying might lift her daughter's spirits and possibly create an opportunity for a meaningful conversation. As Laura sifted through the mess, clothes strewn haphazardly, textbooks piled carelessly, and an assortment of knickknacks scattered around, her eyes caught a glint of glass beneath the bed. Curious, she reached for it and found a half-empty bottle of vodka. Her heart raced as a wave of shock and anger surged through her. She stared at the bottle, her mind racing with thoughts of how to confront Emma. Determined to address the issue head-on, Laura took the bottle and headed for Emma's room. When Emma returned home later, she was met with a tense atmosphere. Laura stood in the doorway of her room, holding up the bottle. "Emma," Laura's voice was tight with emotion. "What is this? Why is there alcohol in your room?" Emma's face turned pale as she saw the bottle. She hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a big deal. It's just a drink." Laura's frustration boiled over. "It's not just a drink, Emma. You're only 16. This is dangerous. Do you understand what you're doing to yourself?" Emma's defensiveness quickly transformed into anger. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like for me. Everything's falling apart." Laura's heart sank. She could see the pain in Emma's eyes and realized that anger wasn't going to help. She softened her tone, trying to reach her daughter. "Messed up? What do you mean by that?" Emma's voice wavered as she spoke. "Just everything. School, friends, you. Nothing feels right anymore. I just wanted to escape for a little while." Laura's frustration gave way to deep concern. She sat down next to Emma on the bed, trying to keep her voice calm. "Emma, I know things are difficult right now. I'm not saying drinking is the answer, but I want to understand what's going on. You can talk to me." Emma's anger seemed to dissipate, but her eyes were still filled with tears. "I don't know if talking will fix anything," she said, her voice cracking. Laura placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder, trying to offer comfort. "We can't solve everything in one conversation, but talking is a start. We can work through this together." Emma looked at her mother, her defenses slowly crumbling. "Okay, I'll try," she whispered. The room fell into a reflective silence. Laura took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew that this was just the beginning of rebuilding their fractured relationship. Later that night, they continued their conversation in the living room, where the mood was more subdued. Laura gently probed, encouraging Emma to open up about her struggles. Emma hesitated at first, but eventually, she spoke about a boy at school who had been bullying her. She had kept the issue to herself, afraid that talking about it would only make things worse. Laura's heart ached for her daughter. "You should have come to me sooner," she said softly. "We could have faced this together. I'm here for you, and we'll find a way to handle it." Emma nodded, her eyes still red from crying. "I was afraid of making things worse. I thought if I could just deal with it on my own, it would get better." Laura reached out and held Emma's hand. "You don't have to go through this alone. We're a team. You can lean on me, and we'll face these challenges together." Emma managed a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mom. I really needed to hear that." The warmth of the moment was a small comfort, but it marked a turning point in their strained relationship. Laura realized that despite their differences, there was still a strong bond between them. As Laura tucked Emma into bed that night, the room was slightly tidier and the atmosphere felt a bit lighter. Laura's voice was gentle as she said, "Good night, Emma." Emma's response was soft but sincere. "Good night, Mom. Thanks for everything." Laura gave her daughter a comforting hug and quietly closed the door behind her as she left the room. In the hallway, Laura paused, reflecting on the challenging but necessary conversation they had. A sense of cautious optimism filled her as she made her way to her own room. She hoped that this small breakthrough was the beginning of a more open and understanding relationship with her daughter. Despite the struggles that lay ahead, Laura was determined to be there for Emma, ready to support her through the difficult times and rebuild their connection, one honest conversation at a time. Case 2. The ghost cat appeared in front of me. Maya was only 8 years old when she had her first and only encounter with something she couldn't explain, something that left an indelible mark on her memory, a moment she would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that lulled her into a deep, peaceful nap. The warm sunlight filtered through the curtains of her small bedroom, casting soft golden light across the room. The gentle hum of the ceiling fan above mixed with the distant chirping of birds outside her window, creating a perfect backdrop for sleep. Wrapped in her favorite blanket, Maya had drifted off easily, her tiny body nestled into the soft mattress as she succumbed to the stillness of the afternoon. She wasn't sure what woke her up. There was no loud noise, no disturbance that yanked her from the embrace of her dreams. But suddenly, she was awake, her eyelids fluttering open as she transitioned from the hazy world of sleep to the reality of her bedroom. Everything seemed normal at first. Her toys were still scattered across the floor, her curtains swayed slightly with the breeze, and the familiar scent of her room filled her nose. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, something unusual caught her attention. There, perched right on top of her, was a black cat. Its fur was sleek and shiny, and its green eyes glowed eerily in the faint light. The cat was staring at her, its gaze unwavering and intense, as if it were peering deep into her soul. For a moment, Maya froze, unable to move, unable to even breathe. She didn't own a cat, nor had she ever seen this one before. The realization sent a jolt of fear through her, and her mind raced with questions. How had it gotten into her room? What did it want? The cat remained still, its green eyes locked onto hers, as if it were silently communicating with her. Maya's heart began to pound in her chest, the sound of her own pulse roaring in her ears. She had always loved animals, but this was different. There was something about this cat that made her feel uneasy, something almost otherworldly about the way it looked at her. She could feel its weight on her chest, the pressure making it harder to breathe. Instinctively, Maya did the only thing her young mind could think of. She pulled the covers over her head, shutting out the sight of the cat. Underneath the blanket, she squeezed her eyes shut, her small body trembling with fear. She wished for the cat to be gone, to disappear as suddenly as it had appeared. She lay there, holding her breath, hoping that when she looked again, the cat would be gone, that this was all just a figment of her imagination. After a few moments, which felt like an eternity, Maya slowly lowered the blanket and peeked out, her heart pounding with dread. She scanned the room, her eyes wide with fear, half expecting to see the cat still perched on her, its green eyes boring into hers. But the cat was gone. Maya sat up quickly, her eyes darting around the room. There was no sign of the black cat anywhere. It was as if it had never been there at all. The spot where it had been sitting was empty, and the room was as quiet and still as it had been when she first woke up. But Maya knew what she had seen. She hadn't imagined it. She had felt the cat's weight, had seen the intensity in its eyes. It had been real, hadn't it? Maya scrambled out of bed, her legs shaking as she moved cautiously around the room. She checked under the bed, behind the curtains, even inside her closet, but there was no trace of the cat. Not a single hair, no paw prints, nothing. It was as if the cat had vanished into thin air, leaving behind no evidence of its existence. For the rest of the day, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. The image of the cat with its piercing green eyes haunted her thoughts. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had she dreamed it? Had it been a hallucination brought on by the haze of sleep? But no matter how hard she tried to rationalize it, the memory of the cat remained vivid, too real to dismiss as just her imagination. That night, as she lay in bed, Maya found herself pulling the covers up to her chin, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The darkness seemed to hold a new weight, a new sense of mystery that she had never noticed before. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made her heart skip a beat. She was afraid to close her eyes, afraid that if she did, the cat would return, watching her from the shadows, waiting for her to wake up. But as the days turned into weeks, and the cat never reappeared, Maya began to wonder if maybe she had imagined the whole thing. Perhaps it had been a dream after all, a strange, vivid dream that had felt real in the moment, but was nothing more than a product of her young, overactive imagination. Yet, despite her efforts to convince herself otherwise, the memory of that afternoon stayed with her, as clear as the day it happened. As Maya grew older, the memory of the ghostly cat lingered in the back of her mind. She didn't talk about it much. How could she? Who would believe her if she told them about the time a ghost cat had appeared in her room? It sounded ridiculous, even to her, but deep down she knew what she had seen. She had felt it, and that was something she couldn't easily dismiss. Even now, as an adult, the memory remained as vivid as ever. The image of those glowing green eyes staring at her with a knowledge and intensity that no ordinary cat should possess was something she could never forget. Maya often wondered if the cat had been trying to tell her something, if its appearance had held some deeper meaning that she had yet to understand. But what that meaning was, she might never know. What Maya did know, however, was that the experience had left her with a lingering curiosity about the paranormal, about the things that existed just beyond the veil of the ordinary. It had opened her eyes to the possibility that there were things in this world that couldn't be explained by logic or reason, things that existed in a realm beyond what we can see or touch. And while she had never seen the ghost cat again, the memory of that day, of those green eyes watching her in the silence of her bedroom, would stay with her forever. A reminder that sometimes the world is far stranger than we can ever imagine. Case 3. It all started on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Alex was in his backyard, the sun casting long shadows across the lawn as he dribbled a basketball, lost in the rhythm of the game. The day was perfect. Clear skies, a light breeze, and the familiar thud of the ball on the concrete. He had his headphones on, drowning out the world with his favorite Spotify playlist, each beat syncing with the bounce of the ball. For Alex, these moments were precious. With school and homework taking up most of his time, he cherished these pockets of freedom where he could just be himself, zoning out with music and sports. The familiar tunes were a comfort, wrapping him in a cocoon of sound as he focused on sinking basket after basket. As he was mid-dribble, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Alex paused, pulling out his phone to check the notification. It was a Snapchat from his best friend, Ryan. Smiling, he opened it to see Ryan's goofy face plastered with a dog filter, complete with floppy ears and a wagging tongue. Typical Ryan, always trying to get a laugh. Alex chuckled and decided to snap a reply. He flipped the camera to selfie mode, preparing to pull a face of his own, when something odd happened. As soon as the camera was on him, a strange sound filled his ears. A low, deep voice, almost like a whisper, but more like a mumble. The words were jumbled, but Alex managed to catch a few: underdog and open. The voice was eerie, almost mechanical, and it sent a shiver down his spine. "What the?" Alex muttered, lowering the phone. His first thought was that his Spotify was glitching. Maybe some weird ad had slipped in, or the song he was listening to had a hidden track he wasn't aware of, but it didn't feel right. The voice didn't match the tone or rhythm of the music at all. Curious, he paused his playlist, the sudden silence almost jarring. He opened Snapchat again, flipping the camera to face himself. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. Maybe it was just a fluke. But then, there it was again. The same deep, garbled voice, muttering words that made no sense together. This time, he caught a few more: drive and toxic. They were random, disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together. Alex's heart began to race as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. He quickly snapped a picture, not caring how it looked, and sent it to Ryan with a caption, "Dude, are you hearing this weird voice, too?" He stared at his phone, waiting for a reply. Ryan was quick, always on his phone, and Alex needed to know he wasn't losing it. But as the seconds ticked by, his anxiety grew. He replayed the voice in his head, trying to find any logical explanation. Was it a bug in the app? Some kind of strange feedback from his headphones? None of it made any sense. Finally, his phone buzzed with Ryan's reply. "What voice? You okay, man?" Alex frowned, reading the message again. Was he the only one hearing this? He tried explaining it to Ryan, typing out everything he had heard, but the words felt clumsy, inadequate. How do you describe something so bizarre, something that didn't fit into any normal category? Ryan's replies were supportive, but confused, filled with theories about glitches and bugs. He suggested restarting the phone, reinstalling the app, all the usual tech fixes, but Alex knew it wasn't that simple. Shaking off the unease, Alex decided to follow Ryan's advice. He restarted his phone, even reinstalled Snapchat, hoping it would put an end to the weirdness. And, for a while, it did. The voice didn't return, and Alex convinced himself it had been nothing more than a glitch, an electronic hiccup in the system. Life went back to normal, and the incident faded into the background, becoming just another weird story to laugh about later. But then, 2 months later, it happened again. Alex had almost forgotten about the whole thing. He was back in his garden, this time not playing basketball, but just lounging on the grass, scrolling through his phone. It was another peaceful day, the kind where everything seemed right with the world. But as he opened Snapchat, intending to send a quick snap to Ryan, the now familiar voice returned. This time, the words were clearer and somehow even more unsettling. "Danger," it said, followed by a garbled, "Close." Alex's breath caught in his throat. The deep voice had the same eerie, mechanical quality as before, but now it felt more insistent, more urgent. His hands shook as he lowered the phone, his mind racing. This couldn't just be a coincidence. There was no logical explanation he could think of that would account for what was happening. The app had been reinstalled. The phone restarted multiple times since the first incident. So why was this still happening? He texted Ryan immediately, his fingers fumbling over the keys as he tried to explain what had just happened. This time, Ryan took it more seriously, asking him detailed questions about what he had heard, how it sounded, and what he had been doing when it happened. But despite their best efforts, they couldn't come up with a solid explanation. Ryan even suggested that maybe someone was playing a prank, somehow hacking into Alex's phone to mess with him, but even that seemed far-fetched. The voice didn't just go away this time. Every time Alex opened Snapchat and the volume was on, the voice would return, always saying different words, always in that same low, garbled tone. It was as if the voice was trying to tell him something, trying to communicate a message that he couldn't quite understand. Days turned into weeks, and the voice became a constant presence, an unwelcome companion that haunted his every move. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for him to open that camera. The words it said became more varied, more cryptic. Hurry. Escape. Look. Each word sent a chill down Alex's spine, leaving him more confused and scared than before. Alex became obsessed with finding out the truth. He spent hours researching online, reading about electronic voice phenomena, haunted apps, and anything else that might explain what was happening. But nothing he found seemed to fit his situation. The more he searched, the more isolated he felt, like he was the only one experiencing this bizarre phenomenon. One night, as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, Alex made a decision. He would record the voice. Maybe if he had proof, he could figure out what it was trying to say, or at the very least, show it to someone who might understand. The next time it happened, he'd be ready. The next day, he sat in his room, phone in hand, heart pounding in his chest. He opened Snapchat, turned on the camera, and waited. It didn't take long. The voice came through, as clear as ever, muttering those strange, disconnected words. But this time, Alex was ready. He hit the record button and captured the entire thing. When it was over, he played the recording back, his heart racing as he listened to the voice once more. But something was different. The words were clearer, more distinct, but they still didn't make any sense together. Danger. Watch. Behind. His blood ran cold. It was as if the voice was warning him, trying to tell him something important, something he needed to hear. But what? What danger? What was he supposed to watch for? And what was behind him? Suddenly, a chill ran down his spine, and he turned around, half expecting to see something or someone standing there. But there was nothing. Just the empty room, silent and still. Alex didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent his imagination into overdrive. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the voice knew something he didn't. Something that could change everything. As the days passed, Alex became increasingly paranoid. The voice continued, growing louder, more insistent. He started avoiding Snapchat altogether, but even then, he couldn't escape it. The voice echoed in his mind, haunting him, taunting him with words that made no sense. He knew he needed to tell someone, someone who might believe him, someone who could help. But who? Who would believe that his phone was haunted, that a voice was warning him about something? It sounded ridiculous, even to him, but he couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was happening, something beyond his understanding, and he needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. Case 4. I used to chat a ghost when I was 7. When I was 7 years old, I had an experience that, to this day, remains both intriguing and unsettling. It all began when my family moved into my uncle's house after he had moved away. The house was large and old, with creaky floors and a big overgrown garden that seemed to stretch on forever. The day we moved in was chaotic. Boxes were scattered everywhere, and my parents were busy unpacking. I was excited about the new house, but mostly I was curious about the big empty yard. I remember stepping outside to explore and saw a boy standing just beyond the front gate. He was about my age, wearing blue shorts and a simple shirt. I didn't get a good look at him beyond that, but he seemed friendly. I walked over to him, eager to make a new friend. "Hi," I said, waving. The boy turned to face me with a smile. "Hi," he replied. His voice was soft but cheerful. We started chatting, and to my surprise, we quickly found a common interest: dinosaurs. "I love dinosaurs," I exclaimed. "Do you?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, they're my favorite. I'm 6. My name's David." I remember feeling happy to have found someone to talk to. We talked for a while about our favorite dinosaurs, comparing notes on which ones we liked the most. It was a simple, innocent conversation, and I felt completely at ease. Just as we were getting into a discussion about which dinosaur was the coolest, my dad walked over. He had a curious look on his face. "What are you talking to?" he asked, looking around. I pointed to David. "I'm talking to David. He's 6 and likes dinosaurs too." My dad looked around, a puzzled expression on his face. "There's no one there, kiddo." I looked back at David, who was still standing there, but he seemed to fade away slightly. I turned back to my dad, a little confused. "But he's right there." My dad shook his head, clearly thinking I was just using my imagination. "Let's get back inside," he said gently. The next day, I saw David again. He was standing in the same spot as before, looking at me with the same friendly smile. I walked over, excited to continue our conversation. This time, David seemed a little more serious. "Stay away from the train tracks," he said. "Why?" I asked, puzzled. "What's wrong with the train tracks?" David didn't answer. Instead, he simply turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a bit unsettled, but not entirely sure why. Later, I told my dad about what David had said. My dad's face turned serious, and he seemed a bit concerned. "Did he say anything else?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just that I should stay away from the train tracks." My dad looked thoughtful. "Well, I'll keep that in mind. Maybe it's just a kid's warning, but you should definitely be careful around the train tracks." As the years went by, I grew up and eventually forgot about David. But one day, while we were reminiscing about the old house and my childhood, my dad brought up the topic. He told me that I had frequently mentioned talking to a boy named David when we first moved in, but he had never seen anyone there. It was a bit unsettling for him at the time, especially with the warning David had given me. My dad's words sparked my curiosity. Could David have been more than just an imaginary friend? I didn't remember much about him, but the few interactions I had with him felt real. I wasn't one to have imaginary friends. I had always preferred real friends and activities. So why had I talked to David, and why had he given me that strange warning? I've been trying to learn more about this experience. My dad mentioned that he had never heard of a boy named David who had lived in the house, and he didn't know of any incidents related to the train tracks. It was as if David had never existed, except in my memory. I've been doing some research, asking around, and trying to piece together any information that could shed light on who David might have been. The idea that I might have spoken to a ghost when I was a child is both fascinating and eerie. If there's anything else I can find out, I'll definitely share it. For now, I'm left with memories of a boy who warned me about the train tracks and a lingering sense of curiosity about what or who David really was. Case 5. My mother is upset. Rita sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. The tension in the room was thick, a familiar weight that seemed to settle in whenever she and her mother Grace had one of their talks. These conversations were like an unpredictable storm, 1 minute calm, the next filled with thunderous emotions. It had always been this way, an on and off relationship marked by heated arguments every few days. Today seemed no different. Rita had woken up feeling frustrated. The endless job search was wearing her down, and the small town they lived in felt suffocating. She believed that if she were in a bigger city, her chances of landing a job would be much higher. It wasn't just the number of opportunities, but also the fact that many companies preferred in-person interviews. The thought had been nagging at her for weeks, and today she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Mom," Rita began, trying to keep her tone neutral, "I was thinking, if I were in a better city, I'd have more job opportunities. It's been tough trying to find something here, especially when so many companies want you to be present for interviews. I'm really starting to believe that moving out might be the best option." Grace looked up from her magazine, her expression unreadable. Rita continued, not noticing the slight tightening of her mother's lips. "I mean, not just for me, but for the future too. If I ever have kids, I want them to have better opportunities, a good education. You know, things we didn't have growing up here." Grace put down the magazine slowly, her movements deliberate. Rita sensed the shift in her mother's demeanor, but pressed on, driven by her own frustration. "I'm just thinking ahead, planning for a better future. I don't want to feel stuck anymore." The silence that followed was palpable. Grace finally spoke, her voice low and controlled, but with an edge that Rita recognized all too well. "So that's all you think about now? Your future, your job, your potential children?" Grace's eyes bore into Rita's, her words sharp. "What about the present? What about your family? Or does that not matter to you anymore?" Rita was taken aback. "Mom, that's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Rita?" Grace interrupted, her voice rising. "You're always thinking about leaving, about going somewhere else, as if this place isn't good enough for you, as if your family isn't enough." "That's not fair, Mom," Rita shot back, feeling the familiar anger bubbling up inside her. "I'm trying to build a life, to secure a future. Is that so wrong?" Grace stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What's wrong is that you're always so focused on what you don't have, on what could be better, instead of appreciating what you do have. You're so obsessed with the future that you're missing out on the present. You're missing out on us." Rita clenched her fists under the table. "I'm not obsessed, I'm just realistic. I want a better life, for me and for my future family. How can you blame me for that?" Grace's face softened, but her eyes remained sad. "I'm not blaming you, Rita. I'm just worried. You're my daughter, and I want what's best for you. But sometimes I feel like you're drifting away, like nothing here is good enough for you anymore." Rita sighed, the fight draining out of her. "Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want more. For myself, for everyone." Grace shook her head slowly. You're not living in the present, Rita. You're so caught up in what might happen that you're forgetting to live now. Life isn't just about the future, it's about today, about the moments we have right here, right now. Rita looked down at her coffee, the steam curling lazily into the air. She didn't know how to respond. She understood her mother's perspective, but the frustration of feeling stuck in a place that offered so little was overwhelming. She wanted to make her mother see that, but words failed her. Grace sighed and sat back down, her voice gentler now. Rita, I love you, and I want you to be happy. But happiness isn't just about where you are, it's about how you live. Don't lose sight of that in your pursuit of a better future. Rita nodded slowly, but inside she felt conflicted. The conversation had only deepened the divide between them, a gap that seemed to widen with each passing day. She wanted to be understood, but it felt like her mother was holding on to something she couldn't grasp, a version of life that no longer fit the reality Rita was facing. The rest of the day passed in a strained silence, with both women lost in their thoughts. Rita couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow at fault, that her desire for more was seen as selfish, even though she believed it was necessary. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, she wondered if there was a way to bridge the gap between them, or if they were destined to remain on opposite sides, each clinging to their own version of what life should be.